I always wanted to be connected to the streets. And I've always wanted to do art that reaches a lot of people. By the 80s, graffiti brought back expressionism. Neo-expressionism grew out of all of that. When I worked for the Unique Clothing Warehouse, Harvey Russack, the guy who owned it, every week he wanted something, a publicity stunt for the store. He wanted to say, come Stan, what can you come up with this week? I want the crowds in. And he had a friend had a big old American car. What we wanted to do is paint this car on Broadway and create havoc on the street. So I'll start doing graffiti on this guy's car and it'll draw a crowd. And then this kid comes up. He said, I'd like to do that. I said, well, here you are. And I gave him the spray cans and he did it. And he did a better job than I would have done. And it finished up and shut down Broadway. Traffic couldn't get through. That's how I was making a living, by creating a buzz for different kinds of things that were going on in the city. I grew up during the war, just outside of London. I was like a suburban kid. And I remember the second wave of bombs coming over London. And we had an air raid shelter, and that had made a big impact on me as a small child. Yeah, my father was an artist. I have great memories of him. He had a Valasat bike, and I used to love going on his Vincent Valasat with him. But he wanted to go to art school. He was very talented as a kid. But my grandmother wouldn't allow him to, because in the Depression, it was just beyond them to even consider sending a kid to college. So he had to get a trade. So he became a plumber, gas fitter. He worked for the gas company. But he loved painting. So he encouraged me to paint. He got me hooked. I had an early childhood with him, and then I had a stepfather after my parents split up, and my stepfather didn't want me to be an artist, so he was discouraging me from going to art school. It was going to be the same story. You know, you can't make a living as an artist. There was an opening to go to this art college, but I had to kind of go in to what is called a trade school, and you could learn how to do painting and decorating, typography. And as soon as I got into art college, I immediately made a point of moving out of that area and going into the fine art department. And I started doing fine art straight away. And that's how I started really becoming a full-time artist. I got kicked out for a couple of years. So I became a beatnik. So I was on the road like a bum, you know, sleeping rough. I was working in part-time jobs, working in theme parks and carnivals and playing piano in pubs and things like that. But you know, scraping a living, just getting by, but not doing my art. I desperately wanted to get back to art again. And eventually I finished up for stealing a $5 gramophone, and I got thrown in jail for that. And then these people saw some good in me, and they got me a scholarship to go back to art school. So anyway, that was a good thing. Good things can come out of really hideous bad things. When I was a student at the Royal College, I was on the student organising committee for the first pop art show in London. And we staged the first show with David Hockney. That was a landmark show in '62 with some of the top young British artists. And I had to take on the establishment to do that. I had to take on the Euston Road School, the old guard, to make sure that all of my crew, my friends at the Royal College, were going to get a good show. I had a hustle like crazy, but we did it. It sort of got me going, and I wanted to do it again when I got to New York. I wanted to kickstart something like that. And so in '74, I arrived in New York, took a loft, and that was my entree onto the New York art scene. And that eventually became the Canal Zone. So I could basically prefabricate whole environments in that space. I did a lot of photo shoots for publicity, for promotions, and all in that space. I did fashion shows for Yves Saint Laurent. I did a spread for Viva magazine. But I was doing corporate work, but all that corporate stuff was feeding my addiction to graffiti. I thought, these guys on the streets, these guys in the subways were blowing my mind, and they were blowing other people's minds as well with this incredible, huge, colorful graphics. This isn't just tagging. This stuff was out there, in your face. The whole idea of being a graffiti artist carried a lot of kind of daredevil antics. These guys were like bold. They were just brave, because when they did the first graffitis in the trains, they were breaking the rules, the law, and they were being chased for doing it, and they were getting arrested, and there was somebody got killed. But these guys were artists, and these guys needed a venue. I managed to find some of these artists because I'd seen an article in the Village Voice about the Fab Five, they were called, and they were doing ball walls in Brooklyn. And I contacted them with this guy called Michael Holman, who's my sort of co-conspirator in this venture. And it was because these guys were promised an article in the New York Times if they could find a venue to do their art in. We decked out the whole place with graffiti, and then they said no. We decided, no, we're not going to run the story. And I said, these guys are so shattered by that. So I said, we're going to make it happen anyway.
And it's happening here and now. If you're lost, you can find yourself.
And what I decided is we'll make an event to launch graffiti as an art movement. So we did the event for Fab 530, and Lee Canonis did these live graffiti on camera.
This gentleman, Lee, he's going to actually perform a graffiti act right here on the wall. I just want you to see this. This guy's the greatest in New York City. Ready, Lee? Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, ready, go. Excuse us now. Let's get a shot of it. He's approaching the easel. He's moving in a red circular kind of fashion. He's obviously the best. His moves are smooth. Notice that, ladies and gentlemen, oh, I wish we could do an instant replay. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen it here at the Canal Zone.
And then in the process, out of the shadows pops Jean Michel.
Hey, Mo, come on, you've seen it on the walls everywhere, especially down the Village. This gentleman right here is Samo.
He was Samo, and nobody knew who Samo was. He was a total mystery. He was an enigma. He came to me, he said, I would like to do a piece as well. I said, you sure can. And I put a spray can in his hand. I said, do that wall there. And I had a big seamless roll of photographic seamless paper up there. And he did this piece. And he worked with this guy called Al Diaz. They collaborated, basically. It was a duo. But what I liked about Jean Michel, it wasn't just scribbles and scrawls. He was actually trying to say something. you know? It was like getting a message out. He was the beginning of art off the streets, but in the galleries. In a few years' time, the galleries were starting to become addicted to his art. The word was up on the street that this guy was now making a fortune. 2 or 3 or 4 artists became prominent artists in galleries. Jean Michel did it, Rammelsy did that, Futura did it. They were adopted by the establishment. They were taken in. The art world decided that they were going to invest and they were going to monetize graffiti. He was around the people and the world that I inhabited for quite a while. It was just kind of drifting around, and eventually he kind of gradually got himself with a lot of money, selling a lot of art at ridiculous prices, and then he was a star. And then he got all these groupies hanging around him, helping him spend his money, especially on drugs. The drugs were very important. Drugs helped to speed things up for him. Unfortunately, and I know because I've been into drugs as well, and I know when you're on drugs, you think you can do more than you should be doing. And I think he really kind of burned himself out just by doing too many drugs and not really being able to keep up with what was really going on in his life. I had been commissioned by the Festival for the Mind, Body and Spirit, a new age group from London, to create a centerpiece for their first festival in New York. And so they wanted a 37-foot diameter dome built, which I did in sections, and it was going to be finally assembled in the Colosseum because the loft wasn't big enough for it. There was going to be an unveiling party for it. And what had happened was that some of the people had been hanging around the loft were getting high. They went into my area where I did all my spraying with all my nitrocellulose lacquers with acetone, knocked over some acetone, and it went up. Boom, the whole thing just blew up. And I got a phone call at about 3 a.m. from this guy, Christopher. He said, "Stan, the loft is going up." And I could hear it on the phone. I could hear this noise. And he was actually in the middle of a big fire. They had to rescue Christopher on a ladder. It was so bad. They couldn't get out. And even the fire escapes weren't 100% safe. So if that had happened earlier, and all those people had been there, it would have been a major human disaster. And the fire just destroyed so much artwork. It was devastating. But I wanted to maximize that whole experience, turning that fire into something positive. The canvas stretched on these triangular sections was scorched and burned, but the wood wasn't. So I did an installation with all those sections in a gallery a few years later in '81. And I reinstalled the dome in this gallery space. The Canal Zone had giant columns in it. And I made great big sonotube columns, and I had sandpaper on the floor, I painted shadows on the floor. The whole thing was like a major installation. I brought it back to life. 79, the fire, 81, the reinvention of the dome. Another one I like. Gershwin, Man I Love.
that's just a little bit of blues, boogie blues.